India is celebrating 79 years of independence. Every Independence Day, we look backwards at how far the country has come since 1947. But this year, there's another question worth asking. Where does India go from here? Because just 21 years from now, India will celebrate 100 years of independence. And the government's ambition for that moment is enormous. Viksit Bharat at 2047, a developed India. But becoming one of the world's largest economies is one thing. Making 1.4 billion people substantially richer is something completely different. Welcome to the last episode of our limited series, The India Advantage. In the first 5 episodes of this series, we spoke about India's biggest advantages. Today, we tell you how India can use those advantages to become Viksit by 2047. India has already undergone an extraordinary economic transformation. In FY26, India's nominal GDP was at around 346 lakh crore rupees, while the real GDP grew by 7.7%. India is now one of the world's largest economies and remains among its fastest growing major economies. But here's the number that changes the conversation: GDP per capita. According to the IMF, India's nominal GDP per person in 2026 is only around $2,810. That's a real challenge. A country can have an enormous economy partly because it is having an enormous population. Becoming developed means that the average person should become dramatically more productive and prosperous. For context, the World Bank currently classifies economies with GNI per capita above $14,375 as high income. GDP per capita and GNI per capita are different measures. So this isn't a direct comparison, but it illustrates the enormous income gap India still needs to close. And by 2047, that high income threshold will itself move higher. India is chasing a moving target. So the real question isn't whether India can become a $10 trillion or a $15 trillion economy. It's whether hundreds of millions of Indians can become substantially richer. And that starts with jobs and productivity. In 2023-24, 46.1% of India's workforce was still employed in agriculture and allied activities, while the sector contributed only around 17.8% of the GDP. Think about that gap. Nearly half of the workers are producing less than one-fifth of the economic output. For India to become rich, millions of workers need opportunities to move into more productive manufacturing and modern services, while agricultural productivity itself rises. And India isn't yet using the full potential of its workforce either. Female labor force participation has improved considerably, but it remains far below male participation. PLFS 2025 still estimates the labor force participation rate for women aged 15 and above at around 40% compared with about 79% for men. Closing even part of that gap could bring millions more women into India's productive economy. Jobs alone aren't enough. India needs human capital. ASER 2024 report found that in rural India, only 48.8% of class 5 children could read a class 2 level text, while only 30.7% could solve a basic division problem. Both numbers improved substantially from 2022, which is encouraging, but they still reveal the scale of the challenge. Because the workers who will determine whether India succeeds in 2047 are sitting in classrooms today. The same is true for healthcare. India's out of pocket health expenditure has fallen significantly, but families still directly bear a substantial share of healthcare costs. A developed India needs both a skilled population and a healthy one. Then comes one area where the transformation is already highly visible: infrastructure. Public capital expenditure has risen dramatically over the past decade, reaching an allocation of 12.2 lakh crore rupees for FY25. Roads, highways, airports, freight corridors, ports, metros, and digital networks can all increase productivity. But the next challenge is cities. As hundreds of millions of Indians become urban, India needs affordable housing, public transport, reliable water, sewage systems, clean air, and sensible urban planning. India cannot become developed with world class airports surrounded by dysfunctional cities. Development has to reach the neighborhood. Then there is energy. A much richer India will need vastly more electricity. Factories need power, data centers need power, electric vehicles also need power, air conditioners also need power, and AI requires enormous computing capacity. By June 2026, India's renewable energy capacity has reached roughly 289 gigawatts, including around 162 gigawatt of solar. But India also remains heavily dependent on coal. So India has to achieve something extraordinarily difficult: more energy, cheaper energy, and cleaner energy simultaneously. Solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, batteries, stronger grids, and eventually green hydrogen will all play role in this. Then comes technology. India already has a huge technology workforce, population scale digital infrastructure, and ambitious programs in AI, semiconductors, biotechnology, quantum computing, and space. But there's an uncomfortable number here too. India's R&D expenditure is only around 0.64% of the GDP. The Economic Survey notes that this is substantially below countries such as United States, China, and South Korea. If India wants to become a technological power, it cannot simply use technologies invented elsewhere. It needs to invent them. The same principle applies to manufacturing. India has made enormous progress in smartphones, pharmaceuticals, and defense. But the next stage is moving from assembly to manufacturing, from manufacturing to design, and from design to intellectual property and innovation. That's where much more economic value is created. And after talking about highways, AI, factories, rockets, and defense, come back to the number we started with: $2,810 per person. That's why becoming big and becoming rich are fundamentally different things. India has made enormous progress in reducing deprivation, but 2047 requires another transformation, from lifting people out of poverty towards moving hundreds of millions into middle class and eventually developed economy living standards. So, can India actually become developed by 2047? It is possible, but it is absolutely not guaranteed. India has extraordinary advantages: a massive domestic market, a relatively young population, a huge technology workforce, improving infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, a growing manufacturing base, and a strategic geographic position. But it is also having much weaknesses that headline GDP numbers can hide. Per capita income remains low. Almost half of the workforce still remains connected to agriculture. Learning outcomes need major improvement. Female workforce participation needs to rise further. Healthcare remains expensive for many families. Cities need enormous investment. R&D spending is low, and India has to manage all of this while dealing with climate change, water stress, and pollution. In other words, India has to industrialize, urbanize, educate, innovate, and decarbonize almost all simultaneously. And that gives us India's real roadmap for 2047. Create productive jobs, invest in education and healthcare, build globally competitive manufacturing, provide abundant and affordable energy, build better cities, invest much more in research and innovation, and strengthen institutions so businesses and individuals can invest, innovate, and plan for long term. Because no country becomes developed simply by increasing GDP. It becomes developed by making its people more productive and prosperous. When India became independent in 1947, it inherited widespread poverty, low industrialization, and extremely limited infrastructure. Today, India is one of the world's largest economies, a technology powerhouse, a global pharmaceutical supplier, a major agriculture producer, an increasingly important manufacturer, and a country preparing for human space flight. That transformation is extraordinary, but the next transformation is different because becoming one of the world's largest economies is largely about scale, but becoming a developed nation is about quality of life. So when India turns 100 in 2047, perhaps the most important number won't be whether its economy is worth $10 trillion or $20 trillion or even more. It will be what that prosperity looks like per person. India's greatest challenge over the next 21 years isn't simply becoming a bigger economy, it's turning economic scale into mass prosperity. The first 79 years proved that India could transform itself. The next 21 will determine how far that transformation can go. And that is what the real India at 2047 is.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.